The day my mother-in-law handed me a printed itinerary at Thanksgiving dinner and announced I'd be staying home alone for Christmas while the real family went to Aspen. I smiled, thanked her, and slipped the paper into my purse. What she didn't know was that 3 weeks earlier, I'd received a certified letter from a law firm in Boston that would unravel everything she built her entire identity around. My name is Hadley, and I've been married to my husband for 6 years. We met at a coffee shop in Cambridge during my second year of grad school. He was sweet, slightly awkward, with a laugh that made strangers turn around. He told me on our third date that his family was a lot, and I, 26 and stupid in love, had laughed and said every family was a lot. I had no idea. His mother is named Whitney, though everyone in her orbit calls her Wit, which she pronounces like it's a brand. She runs a small but profitable interior design firm in Connecticut and has the kind of social calendar that requires a personal assistant. Her husband, my father-in-law, is a retired surgeon who mostly stays out of her way. Then there's my sister-in-law Bristol, who married a hedge fund guy named Crawford and has 2 perfect blonde children. She dresses in matching linen. And then there was me, the girl from a working-class town in central Pennsylvania, whose mother had worked 2 jobs and whose father had passed when I was 17. I had scholarships, a master's in public health, and a job I genuinely loved at a nonprofit focused on maternal care access. I did not, however, have a trust fund, a summer home, or a last name anyone in their circle recognized. I'll never forget the first time Whitney met me. My husband had brought me to their house in Greenwich for Easter, and she looked me up and down at the door and said, "Oh, you're not what I pictured." Then she pulled my husband aside in the kitchen and asked him, loud enough for me to hear, if I was just a phase. I should have run that day, but I didn't, because I loved her son, and because I genuinely believed people could change. 6 years of holidays, birthdays, baby showers for Bristol, christenings for Bristol's kids, and not once did Whitney warm to me. She corrected my grammar at dinner parties. She forgot to invite me to the women's brunches she hosted. When I got pregnant 2 years ago and lost the baby at 14 weeks, she sent a single text, "These things happen. Better luck next time." That was it. No call, no flowers, nothing. My husband always defended her in that exhausted way men do when they've spent their whole lives apologizing for their mothers. She doesn't mean it like that. She had a hard childhood. She'll come around. She didn't come around. She got worse. Then last spring, things shifted. Whitney's mother, an elegant woman named Constance who'd lived in Boston for 70 years, passed away after a long illness. I'd only met Constance 4 times in my entire marriage. She'd been bedridden the last 2 years, and Whitney had handled all the visits, the caregivers, the medical decisions. To hear Whitney tell it, she'd practically given up her life to care for her mother. I went to the funeral, of course. My husband and I drove up to Boston on a rainy Tuesday in April. I sat in the back of the church in a navy dress Whitney had once told me made me look matronly. I watched Bristol weep dramatically in the front pew. I watched Whitney accept condolences like a queen. And then, after the service, in the church hall over watery coffee and dry sandwiches, a woman approached me. She was small, maybe 70, with silver hair cut into a sharp bob and eyes that didn't miss anything. She introduced herself as Margot, and she said she'd been Constance's closest friend for over 40 years. She told me she'd heard so much about me. I was confused. About me. Margot smiled. "Constance asked about you often, dear. Every visit. She wanted to know how you were doing." I felt my throat tighten. "I'm sorry, I didn't know that. I wasn't able to see her much." "I know," Margot said gently. "Whitney kept the visits very managed." The word she chose was managed. Not limited, not difficult. Managed. We talked for maybe 10 more minutes. She told me Constance had loved my work, had read about the maternal health initiative I'd helped launch in Philadelphia, had clipped articles from the Inquirer when I was quoted. I had no idea. I had genuinely thought Constance barely knew I existed. Margot took my hand before she left and said, "She left some things in her will that I think will surprise you. Don't let Whitney get to it first." I assumed Margot was just being kind, an old woman moved by grief. I didn't think about it again for almost a month. Then the certified letter arrived. It was from a law firm in Boston requesting my presence at the reading of Constance's will, which had been delayed due to certain complexities in the estate. Apparently, I had been named in the will. Apparently, I needed to come in person. I told my husband. He was as confused as I was. I didn't even know grandmother liked you that much. I didn't either, I said. We agreed I'd go alone, since he had a major work deadline that week and the trip would only take a day. I took the train up to Boston on a Thursday in October. I sat in a wood-paneled office across from a lawyer named Hollander, who slid a folder across the desk and watched my face as I read. Constance had been wealthier than anyone in the family realized. She'd come from old Boston money on her mother's side, but the real fortune was something she built herself, quietly, over 50 years of investing inherited capital with a discipline that would have made any portfolio manager weep. By the time she died, her estate was worth just over $43 million. Whitney had assumed, as her only daughter, that she would inherit the majority of it. That had been the plan for decades. Whitney had built her entire identity around the eventual transfer of her mother's wealth. The house in Aspen, the membership at the country club, the renovations on the Greenwich property, the cash she funneled to Bristol whenever Crawford's bonus came in light, all of it had been financed against the expectation of that inheritance. But Constance, in the last year of her life, had rewritten her will. Whitney would receive a one-time payment of $300,000. Bristol would receive $100,000. The vast majority of the estate, just over $38 million, was being placed into a charitable foundation. The foundation's purpose was to fund maternal health initiatives in underserved communities across the United States. It would be named the Constance B. Halstead Foundation. And the foundation's executive director, to be paid a salary of $240,000 annually, plus discretionary control over grant-making decisions, was me. Mr. Hollander watched me carefully as I read. He pushed a glass of water across the desk. He told me Constance had left a personal letter for me, sealed, and asked that I read it alone. I sat in that office for an hour. I read the letter 3 times. Constance had written that she'd watched me for years. She'd had her assistant pull every article I'd been quoted in, every interview I'd given, every public-facing piece of work I'd done. She wrote that she'd seen something in me the first time we met, 16 years before her death, at the family Thanksgiving where Whitney had introduced me as the girl my son is seeing for now. She wrote that she'd known then that her daughter would never accept me, and that she'd watched, year after year, as Whitney systematically tried to make me feel small. She wrote that she'd been quiet about it because she was old and tired and her daughter was difficult, but that she'd made a decision near the end of her life to do something about it. She wrote that she did not want Whitney to inherit the money she'd built. She wrote that Whitney had not earned it. She wrote that I had. The last paragraph said, "My dear, the foundation is yours to build. Do not let my daughter touch it. Do not let her near it. She will try. She will tell you it should have been hers. She will use my death as a weapon. Do not yield. The work matters more than her feelings. And the work, I believe, will heal you in ways my family never let it." I cried in that office for a long time. I signed the paperwork that afternoon. Mr. Hollander asked when I wanted to inform the family. I told him I needed a few weeks. He understood. I rode the train home in a daze. I sat in my kitchen that night and told my husband everything. He read the letter. He sat in silence for a long time. Then he said something I will never forget. He said, "She's going to lose her mind." I asked him if he wanted me to refuse it, if it would damage our marriage, if I should walk away from the foundation to keep the peace. He looked at me, and for the first time in our entire relationship, his face had something in it that wasn't apology or appeasement. It was clarity. He said, "No. Grandmother knew exactly what she was doing. You're the right person, and my mother has spent 20 years treating you like an obstacle. Take it." I should have known then that something was already shifting in him too. 3 weeks passed. Mr. Hollander began the legal process of transferring the foundation's assets. I quietly began identifying potential board members, advisors, and program staff. I gave notice at my nonprofit job, which they understood, since I was leaving to lead a $40 million foundation focused on the exact work I'd been doing for years. And then came Thanksgiving. Whitney hosted, as she always did. The whole family in Greenwich. Bristol, Crawford, the kids. My father-in-law silent in his armchair. My husband and me trying to act normal. Whitney had been strange since her mother's funeral. She'd been waiting on the formal reading of the will, which had been delayed for reasons no one had explained to her. She'd been calling Mr. Mast Hollander, who'd been politely deflecting. She'd been telling everyone at her country club that she was about to come into a substantial inheritance. She'd been spending against it, too. She'd already put a deposit on a new BMW. She'd booked the Aspen house for Christmas. That Thanksgiving dinner, she made a show. She stood up before dessert with a champagne flute and announced that she'd be flying the family to Aspen for Christmas. She listed everyone. My husband. Bristol. Crawford. The kids. My father-in-law. Even her cousin and her cousin's husband, who lived in California and whom I'd met maybe twice. She did not list me. Then she turned to me with that small surgical smile she perfected and said, "Hadley, dear, we couldn't get a seat for you on the jet, and the house is just so full. I'm sure you understand. It'll be lovely for you to have some quiet time at home. I'll send you a printed itinerary so you know when to expect everyone back." The room went silent. Bristol giggled into her wine. Crawford coughed. My husband opened his mouth. I touched his hand under the table, gently. He closed his mouth. I smiled at Whitney. I said, "That sounds wonderful. Thank you for thinking of me." She handed me the printed itinerary, which she had apparently prepared in advance. I slipped it into my purse. I knew then that she still didn't know. Mr. Mile. Hollander had told me the formal reading was scheduled for the second week of December. Whitney was, at that moment, only a few weeks away from finding out that the inheritance she'd been spending against didn't exist. I went home that night and I did not say a word, not to anyone. 2 weeks later, on a cold Tuesday in December, the formal reading happened. Whitney attended. Bristol attended. Their lawyer attended. My husband attended, but I did not. Mr. Hollander had thought it would be wiser. I waited at home. My husband called me from the parking lot afterward. His voice was shaking, not with fear, with something like awe. He said, "She screamed. She actually screamed in the office. She knocked a chair over. Bristol had to walk her out. She kept saying it had to be a mistake. She kept saying her mother would never." And then Hollander mentioned your name as executive director, and I thought she was going to have a stroke. He paused. Then he said, "I'm proud of you." That was the moment, I think, when I knew our marriage was actually going to survive this. Because for the first time in 6 years, my husband had picked me out loud, in a room with his mother, and not flinched. Whitney called me that night 47 times. I did not answer. She called the next morning. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was 11 minutes long. She accused me of manipulating her dying mother. She accused me of forging documents. She accused me of running a long con on her family. She said I'd married her son for the inheritance, which was particularly rich given that she'd spent 6 years assuring everyone I was a gold digger before there was any gold for me to dig. I saved that voicemail. The third day she showed up at our apartment in Brooklyn. She'd driven down from Connecticut and was standing outside our building at 8 in the morning. Her face puffy, her hair undone in a way I'd literally never seen. My husband answered the buzzer. He didn't let her up. He went down to the lobby. They had a 40-minute conversation that I watched from the window of our 7th-floor apartment. He told me later what he'd said. He'd told her that he loved her, but that she had spent 6 years treating his wife like garbage, and that his grandmother had clearly seen it, and that the foundation was Hadley's now, and that there was no court in this country that would overturn it because the documentation was airtight and his grandmother had been completely lucid at the time of the rewrite. He told her she could continue to be his mother, or she could lose her son. Those were her 2 options. She chose, of course, to scream. She chose to call me again on his phone, every name she'd been calling me privately for years, but louder. She chose to tell him that I had stolen her birthright. She chose to tell him that if he didn't make me sign the foundation over to her, she would cut him out of her life permanently. He told her calmly that he loved her, but that he was going home now. He came upstairs and he held me on the couch for a long time. He didn't say much. He didn't have to. The week after that was the worst. Bristol called me. She tried a different angle. She cried on the phone. She said her mother was falling apart, that she'd lost 12 pounds, that she couldn't sleep. that she was talking about selling the Greenwich house because she couldn't afford it without the inheritance. Bristol asked, gently, if I could just consider giving Whitney a portion. Not all of it. Just enough. Maybe 10 million, maybe 5, maybe 2. Just something to keep the family whole. I told Bristol that the foundation was a legal entity governed by a board of trustees, and that even if I wanted to, I could not redirect its funds to a private individual. That was in fact true. Constance had structured it specifically to make sure Whitney could not access it. Bristol got mean then. She said I'd planned this all along. She said I'd worked on Constance during those last visits, even though I'd only seen Constance twice in the last 2 years of her life, both times for less than an hour, both times with Whitney sitting between us like a security guard. She said I'd taken advantage of a dying woman. She said the whole family knew the truth. I let her finish. Then I said, very calmly, Bristol, your mother told me at Thanksgiving that she couldn't get me a seat on the jet to Aspen. Your grandmother saw that for 16 years. She made her own decision. I didn't ask for any of this. But I'm not giving it back. I hung up. The Aspen trip, as it turned out, did not happen. Whitney could not afford it without the inheritance she'd been counting on. She'd already put deposits down on things, including the BMW, that she now had to walk away from. She lost the deposit on the car. She had to refinance the Greenwich house. She canceled her country club membership. Her interior design business, which had been coasting for years on her reputation and her social connections, started to struggle when her social connections began whispering about what had happened. I want to say I didn't feel anything when I heard. I want to say I was the bigger person. I wasn't. There was a part of me, a part I'm not proud of, but I am also not ashamed of, that felt the smallest, sharpest satisfaction. 6 years. 6 years of being told I wasn't good enough, wasn't the right kind, wasn't what she'd pictured. 6 years of being managed and minimized and excluded. 6 years of being told I should be grateful that her son had chosen me. I built a foundation that year. We made our first grants in March. We funded a doula training program in Mississippi. We funded a maternal mortality research project at Howard. We funded a mobile clinic in rural West Virginia that travels to women who can't get to OBs. By the end of the first year, we granted out $4 million, and we were just getting started. My husband sits on the board now as a non-voting member. He has been the most supportive partner I could have hoped for. We bought a house upstate last summer, a small one, nothing flashy. We're trying for a baby again. The doctors are hopeful. Whitney has not spoken to either of us in over a year. She sent one card last Christmas, addressed only to my husband, with a note inside that said she missed him and hoped he'd come to his senses. He didn't reply. My father-in-law quietly has been in touch. He sends me emails sometimes. He told me in one of them that he'd known what Constance was planning. He said he hadn't agreed with it at the time, but that he understood it now. He said his wife had become someone he didn't entirely recognize, and that maybe this was the only thing that could have stopped her trajectory. He said he was sorry for the years of dinners I'd had to sit through. He said he should have spoken up. He said his mother-in-law had been a remarkable woman, and that she had clearly seen something in me that her own daughter never would. I keep that email. I read it sometimes. Bristol and I have not spoken either, but I heard from Crawford recently. He reached out, awkwardly, professionally, asking if the foundation might consider a partnership with his firm's philanthropic arm. I considered it. I declined. I told him politely that we have a robust pipeline of partners and we weren't taking new ones at this time. He understood. The last thing I want to say is this. I did not plan any of this. I did not work my way into an old woman's affections. I did not scheme. I did not even know Constance had been watching me. For years I felt invisible in that family. And the irony, the thing I keep coming back to, is that I had been seen the whole time. I had been seen by the only person in that family who mattered, and she had been watching and she had been waiting, and at the end of her life she had reached out from her sickbed in Boston and corrected, in one stroke, every wrong that had been done to me at every Thanksgiving table for 16 years. I think about her often. I think about what it must have been like, to know your own daughter that well and to make that choice anyway. I think about the love it took, the clarity, the cold, steady decision to protect a stranger over your own child, because you knew your child had become something you couldn't redeem. I run the foundation in her name. I work every day. I think about the women we fund and the babies they carry and the mothers they will become. I think about my own mother, who scrubbed floors at a hospital for 28 years and who is now sitting in a sunny condo in Florida that I bought her with my first foundation salary. And sometimes on the quiet nights, I think about that printed itinerary Whitney handed me at Thanksgiving, the one that listed everyone she was taking to Aspen and left me at home. I keep it in a drawer in my office. I look at it once in a while, not because I'm bitter, because I want to remember. I want to remember what it felt like to be told I didn't belong. I want to remember the smile I kept on my face. I want to remember that the woman across the table had no idea at all, that the ground had already shifted beneath her feet, and that the inheritance she had built her whole identity around was, in less than a month, going to walk out of a lawyer's office in Boston and into the hands of the girl she had never once invited to brunch. The day I read Constance's letter, I cried for an hour. The day Whitney found out, my husband called me from a parking lot and said he was proud of me. The day we made our first grant, I sat in my office and thought, finally, the work matters more than her feelings. And it does. It always did. Sitting in my office last week, looking at that printed itinerary Whitney handed me at Thanksgiving, I realized something I wish I'd understood years earlier. Every dinner I'd sat through quietly, every cutting remark I'd absorbed without firing back, every brunch I wasn't invited to, every holiday I smiled through clenched teeth, none of it had been wasted. People who treat others poorly almost always reveal themselves to someone who's paying attention. Constance had been paying attention. She'd been watching her daughter for 16 years, and she'd been watching me too, and the way I'd carried myself through all of it had been the slowest, quietest interview of my life. I think about cause and effect now in a way I never did before. Whitney built her whole identity around an inheritance she assumed was guaranteed because she was the only daughter. She believed bloodline gave her ownership. She spent the money before it existed. She treated me like an inconvenience because she thought she could afford to. And when the consequences came for her, they came in a quiet, wood-paneled office in Boston, and they took everything. She wasn't punished by some cosmic force. She was punished by the very mother she'd assumed would always favor her, because that mother had finally seen her clearly. What I want any woman watching this to understand is that the way you behave when no one important seems to be watching is, in fact, the only thing that ever truly matters. I was kind to Constance during those short, supervised visits, not because I expected anything, but because she was an elderly woman who deserved respect. I built my career in maternal health, not because it would impress anyone, but because the work mattered to me. I held my tongue at those Thanksgiving tables not out of weakness, but because I knew deep down that engaging with Whitney's cruelty would only diminish me. Character, the kind built from doing right when no one applauds, is its own quiet inheritance. The mind you develop through years of real work, of choosing books over gossip, of caring about something larger than your own social standing, is a fortress nobody can take from you. And the inner toughness, the steady refusal to break or beg or grovel, that comes only from staying upright through long seasons of being underestimated. Whitney had none of these. She had inherited her mother's address book and assumed it was the same thing as her mother's substance. It wasn't. And when the moment came, the world could tell the difference. If you're being treated the way I was treated by an in-law, a colleague, a so-called friend, please hear me. Do not bend yourself smaller to make peace with them. Do not perform gratitude for crumbs. Keep doing your work. Keep being decent. Keep showing up as the person you actually are. Someone, somewhere is watching. Maybe it's an elderly grandmother in Boston. Maybe it's your future self. Maybe it's a room full of women whose lives your work will one day quietly change. The work matters more than their feelings. It always did.